What if one of America's most beloved first ladies wasn't just a matriarch, but a woman whispered to be tied to the occult, secretly atheist, and once the leader of a wild teenage girl gang? Barbara Bush's life hides stories so unbelievable. You'll wonder how they stayed buried this long. The mystery of her birth. Could Barbara Bush really be Aleister Crowley's daughter? This theory sounds like something straight out of a supernatural thriller, yet it has been circulating for nearly half a century. In 1924, Barbara's mother, Pauline Pierce, traveled across Europe, and according to several accounts, she moved in bohemian circles filled with esoteric thinkers, artists, poets, and people fascinated by occult experimentation. Around that same time, Aleister Crowley, the infamous occultist, mystic, poet, and self-proclaimed magician, was living between Paris and the south of France, surrounded by admirers and curious women from across Europe. Conspiracy theorists claim that Pauline may have taken part in one of Crowley's rituals, the strange theatrical ceremonies involving sexual practices and so-called rites of life force. 8 months after her return to the United States, she gave birth to Barbara. As evidence, they pointed to anything they could find: a similar mouth shape, shared features in the chin line, the heavy, intense gaze both were known for, the timing of Pauline's European trip, and even the fact that Pauline's younger sister was involved with New York's bohemian scene, where Crowley had loyal followers. Historians dismiss the theory as a myth, one that originally began as an April Fool's joke. But the power of the story is undeniable. It took on a life of its own and became part of America's cultural folklore, a shadowy little legend that follows the Bush dynasty to this day. A coincidence? A myth? Or something stranger buried in the past? The fetus in the glass jar, the moment that shaped a future president. This story is so unbelievable that many assumed it was fiction until George W. Bush himself revealed it in 2010. In the early 1960s, Barbara suffered a miscarriage. Her reaction, which some might call cold but which was entirely in line with her personality, was calm and purposeful. She collected the tiny, undeveloped fetus, placed it in a glass jar, wrapped it in a towel, and drove it to the hospital. She brought her 15-year-old son, George, with her. He sat beside her holding the jar and later said that the moment became one of the most difficult and most defining experiences of his life. He said it was the first time he truly understood how fragile life is. This episode explains much about his later political positions on abortion, family, and personal responsibility. To outsiders, the scene feels almost surreal. But to Barbara, it was an act of control in a moment when emotion could have broken everything. She did what needed to be done, and that combination of strength, bluntness, and emotional severity would surface many times throughout her life. Going gray in months, the tragedy that changed her forever. Early photos show Barbara as a dark-haired, vibrant young woman. But everything changed in 1953 when her daughter Robin was diagnosed with leukemia, a diagnosis that was nearly always fatal at the time. Barbara spent months in the hospital, reading to her daughter, sitting by her bed, braiding tiny locks of hair, until the illness won. The grief was so overwhelming that within just a few months, Barbara's hair turned completely white. This wasn't a poetic metaphor. It's visible in photographs from that era. She never tried to dye it back. She said the white hair became a part of her memory of Robin. It was from that moment that the iconic image of the silver fox, one of the most recognizable First Lady personas in American history, was born. They were underprivileged. Anyway, the Katrina comment America never forgave. In 2005, during a visit to a Texas sports complex where evacuees from Hurricane Katrina were being housed, Barbara Bush made a remark that still haunts her legacy. These were people who had lost everything: homes, jobs, documents, loved ones, and were living on cots in unfamiliar shelters. And then America heard the former First Lady say, "Many of these people were underprivileged anyway, so this is working very well for them." The comment sounded as if the destruction of an entire city was some kind of unexpected improvement for poor families. The backlash was immediate. Critics called her tone-deaf, elitist, and incapable of understanding human suffering. Commentators said this moment crystallized what many already sensed. that she had always seemed detached from ordinary struggles, and this was the moment it finally showed. It became one of the most controversial and widely repeated moments of her public life. Alcohol, cigarettes, and the infamous joke. My son turned out this way because of me. In the late 1990s, tabloids repeatedly circulated a rumor that Barbara had once joked to a doctor, "George turned out the way he did because I drank and smoked during pregnancy." It was a shocking statement, bold, almost defiant, and it spread instantly. Yes, Barbara genuinely enjoyed her evening cocktails. Yes, she smoked as a young woman, just as many women in the 1940s and 1950s did. But there is no evidence she drank during pregnancy. Still, the rumor fit perfectly into the family narrative. George W. Bush had a famously rowdy youth, struggles with alcohol, college trouble, and DUIs. People love simple explanations for complicated lives, and this joke became a convenient symbol. Over time, it transformed into a sort of Bush family folklore, one of those stories that refuses to die. Rebel Barbara, the wild youth. No one expects. Today, most people picture Barbara Bush as a calm, strict, commanding presence. But in her youth, she was the opposite, so much so that her school friends called her unrestrainable. She loved pranks, late-night adventures, and bold ideas. She even formed a small girls' gang, with a group of spirited friends who snuck out at night, rode in the back of pickup trucks with college boys, climbed school rooftops, stole campus signs, and were once caught trying to hide one in a maintenance shed. She laughed loudly, talked fast, acted impulsively, and that energy stunned young George H.W. Bush when they met at a Christmas dance in December 1941. He later told friends, "She laughed like she lit up the entire room." Their love story, which lasted more than 70 years, began with that youthful spark, not the stern First Lady personality history remembers. No more Bushes, and her sharp dislike for Donald Trump. Barbara Bush was a woman who always said what she thought, no matter who was listening. In 2013, she shocked the country by saying, "There are more people out there and enough Bushes already." She openly stated she didn't want her son Jeb to run for president. It was so unexpected that it caused a measurable rift inside the family, which prided itself on presenting a united front. But her views on Donald Trump were even harsher. She considered him vulgar, dangerous, a man who destroys the dignity of politics. She said his comments about women were unforgivable, and that his style of communication made America weaker and coarser. In her private letters, she described him as a sad example of what public culture is becoming. For a Republican First Lady from the old guard, this was nearly an act of rebellion against her own political camp. Atheism and support for same-sex marriage, the unexpected beliefs of a conservative icon. Although the Bush family is synonymous with American conservatism, Barbara herself held surprisingly independent beliefs. She rarely attended church, avoided religious organizations, and openly admitted, "I don't consider myself particularly religious, but I do believe people should be kind to each other." Her stance on same-sex marriage was just as unexpected. She believed that adults have the right to love whom they choose and that the government shouldn't interfere in personal relationships. For a Republican First Lady in the 1980s and 1990s, such views were almost shocking, and her comments are still cited today as an example of quiet liberalism inside one of America's most conservative dynasties.